Yeah, it's been a strange journey. I was realizing, coming up here, should I turn this on? I was realizing driving up here this morning that I hadn't been on Bush campus since graduation here in 1983. It looks sort of the same. This building is new. The trees are bigger. I don't know if any of you were around here in the 1980s, but they had just opened this campus, and I think the tallest tree on campus was about this high. And so when the wind blew, it was just intense. I don't know if this is still like the windiest spot in New Jersey or not. Yeah, so it's been a strange journey. I'll be happy to answer more questions about that at the end of the talk if you want to sort of know how you get to be from an artist to to whatever I am now. But I'm slowly, I think you'll detect creeping back towards being an artist again, escaping from the clutches of the computer, hopefully. So I want to talk today about something that's been getting me excited the last couple of years. It's been a while since I've done what I would call strictly 3D computer graphics, and have been very intrigued by this whole rise in digital photography. And so there's a lot of thoughts that I've been having recently and thinking about sort of where the future of digital photography is going, and sort of at least where I want it to go, perhaps my sort of personal hope that where it's going to go, and where I think we'll be in a few years. The key word in this talk is moment, and hopefully very soon you'll know what I mean by a moment. So let's get going. So this is a moment in history. Again, having been an art major first, studied art history, and this was painted back in the 16th century. And you look at this picture, and it's a wonderful, wonderful painting. And it's wonderful because you can look at it for a long time. You can keep taking in more things. You really get a sense of being there, so to speak. There's this action happening. You know what's going on, but nobody in their mind. If you were a photographer and you wanted to go out and capture this moment, I mean, if somebody had taken a photograph and it looked like that, you would go, that's just an amazing possibility to capture that. It's very, very unlikely that all of these things that are going on were really happening in any particular instant in time, which is what happened when we take a picture. So I really want to make a distinction between a moment and a photograph. This is a family setting. You see here, and you often, you get your family together and you want to take, a group picture or your family picture, and this is, kind of typically what happens when you take a picture. Because a photograph it's almost an objective recording of what's going on out there, and it's a point, a speck, an instant in space and time. It's all the light that's happened to be passing through this little itty-bitty hole at that instant that you push the button. Unfortunately, Grandma turned away. Dad over here turned away because the kid was starting to misbehave, and luckily Grandpa was here, and you got a couple people smiling. But it's almost impossible, if you've ever tried to do this, to get everybody to look at the camera and smile at the same time. This, on the other hand, is I'll call a moment. And in fact, what you see there never actually took place in any instant in time. And yet, if you were to sort of ask the photographer, I don't know how you would run this experiment, but if you were to ask the photographer or somebody sitting there next to the photographer, what was going on at this point, more general point in space and time at this moment, I think that they would probably answer something more like this. Sure, everybody sat down, everybody was looking at the camera, everybody was smiling, we were all together having a good time. And yet it never actually occurred, in some sense. Although, in another sense, in a subjective sense, it really did occur. And in fact, I'd say, I claim in some ways that this is more real than this. So let me sort of put this on, you've got to put everything into some scale, and where do we place these things? So if we put a photograph, let's say, way over here, and a photograph is this kind of objective sort of thing that we can click in what we see at the end. We can at least, to a first approximation, assume that was really going on in the world. Way over on the other side is this thing called qualia. I don't know if you've ever run into this word, but qualia is if you and I look at some visual phenomena, we look at something, I think we'll all agree, we probably all agree that you and I will see, in some sense, a different thing. That your experience of the exact same stimulus and my experience of that stimulus will be quite different because of our our genetic makeup, because of our life experiences, for a whole variety of reasons, we'll have a different experience, the mood we're in that day, what we had for lunch. And so those are quite different and quite personal. So we can draw a line, and I'll draw just a little bit to the right of the photograph, and that'll be sort of the separation of objective and subjective. What I'd like to claim, and I don't have any good evidence for this, is that there's another line somewhere, let's say some finite distance to the right of this line. Maybe it's very close. I don't want to call this any sort of linear scale, but at least there's some line to the right of this that I'm going to call, which is within the subjective zone, but which is sort of separates universal from personal. This is clearly a personal experience, and yet there's something here that maybe we could all agree that if we all looked at this situation, that there's something that's not quite objectively real, but is somehow human, universally human. And those are these moments, and that's the kind of thing that a good photographer is able to capture and to convey. And those are the things that I'll claim is really the goal that we have when we go out in the world with our camera, when we go off, touring around. That we want. That's the thing that we really want to get into that box and somehow share with somebody else. Is these moments, not necessarily these objective photographs. So actually just last night, just flipping thing. Good photographers are really good at this, and Cartier-Bresson is very famous for this. If you know his photography through World War II and previous to World War II, sort of the middle of the 20th century, captured these incredible moments. But most of us are not quite as good at it as he was, and so I'd like to somehow enable everyone to have that ability a little bit more. Of course, there's painters that are able to capture moments in some other sort of sense of the word very well, and have done this quite well through time. What I'm not trying to talk about is anything that's kind of on this orthogonal aspect, that not necessarily sort of reality or impressionist or a particular style, but rather this kind of collection, this experiential collection. So I'm not going to sort of venture off on this line. I really want to sort of stay thinking about this axis between the objective and subjective. So, if we look back into the 1800s, this momentous, this incredible event happened, which was the camera got invented. And up until that point, artists were always responsible not only for conveying expressions, but for actually, they were the recorders of history in some sense, the recorders of culture. And, they certainly, although, they may or may not have tried to be objective in what they were painting, probably, who knows what was in their mind, they were the ones that conveyed those things. And as we saw in this earlier painting, those are the ones who were, able to capture these moments. But then the camera came along, and we all said, well, we don't really need artists to do that anymore. The camera does that. But of course, the camera doesn't actually do that. That whole human interpretation was somewhere lost. And is there some way that we can get that back? And that's kind of my whole thesis, is that we want to somehow use technology in such a way to get back to somewhere, or to get this more complete recapturing the moment, so to speak. So here's the device that I really want. Actually, I had my digital camera yesterday, and I was bringing it. I was going to do some things here, and it just died on me. And actually, last night at 8 o'clock in the evening, I went to Best Buy and actually got a brand new digital camera, which I've never used. Which later on, if I talk to some of you people, we can try to use it. But it's not exactly this camera. But this is the one I really wanted to buy. They didn't have it. What I want is maybe a 10 megapixel sensor. Sensors are already getting good enough. The one I bought last night has 7 megapixels. But what I wanted to do is to be recording at that resolution at, say, 200 hertz, 200 frames per second. And what I'd like to do is I wanted to have a sort of a running buffer inside. In fact, there is a camera now that has this. There's a Casio that will record the past, which is pretty amazing. Maybe I should have got that one. But it has this running buffer. So imagine that it's continuously on, just kind of keeping this piece. And then there's a whole set of user interfaces we could do with that. So imagine that what you've got in this little itty-bitty box at every moment, at every instant of time, is this little chunk of space-time. Does that make sense? So it's got this whole buffered up piece of the world, and maybe it looks something like that. I'll kind of refer back to this type of diagram a little later. You can sort of imagine this thing filling up, let's say from back to front in this case, as time goes on, and then it just starts at the back again. And so we've always got this, sort of round robin sort of buffer filling up. So we've got this little chunk of space-time. And there's some interesting things one can do when you look at the top surface of this, for example. So what could you do with this? Well, the normal point-and-click mode, this is what we would all generally go out and do. You go out and you take pictures of the world. The problem, of course, is that, at least with my camera, there's always this irritating delay. It's gotten better now. The older digital cameras, there's really a delay. But, just between the time when you want to capture that instant and when it happens, there's a little, there's a little pause. And so, you're taking a picture of your friend, and this is what, she looks like. It's not at all what you're remembering. In fact, nobody thinks that each of us looks like this about 1/10 of the time, but about 1/10 of the time, this is kind of what we look like. In fact, when at the moment when I thought I was pushing the button, this is what she looked like. So it's really nice. Imagine going out, you take a picture, and then you get to kind of wind back time into the past, that quarter of a second, right? Because it's really that quarter of a second that's critical, and it's going to make a pretty big difference between the quality of the picture that you capture. There's another really neat thing that you get. I'm not going to talk about this. You get what's called high dynamic range. If you've gone out and taken a picture of an outdoor scene, you can either get the foreground looking good and the sky turns white, even though it's a beautiful blue sunny day, or you get a nice blue sky and everything up in front is dark, and you just can't capture that all, even though our eyes are much higher dynamic range than almost any of the sensors we have today. But imagine that with the 200 frames per second, it's not really trying to make every one of those 200 frames a good photograph, but it's literally sort of keeping a count of how many photons hit the sensor during that interval that the shutter was open, maybe 5/100th of a second. But we've got that over time, and Leonard McMillan and his student last year had a really nice paper to show how you could take these little chunks of space-time and do high dynamic range, because you could, in essence, sort of every pixel you could count how long it took, let's say, to hit 10,000 photons or something like that, and get a very good, whether you might have got it in that first 5/100th of a second, but it might have taken a few frames, and you could really record, very wide range and get the blue sky and the foreground. So that would be sort of your standard, point and click. It would not only let you, wind back time, but would let you do a lot of things that in the exposure space you can't do. Or, you might take this picture and you wind back time a little bit, this windy day, and say, that's, that was really that instant that I was trying to capture when I pushed the button. So another thing we might do is panoramas. So, first of all, how many of you own a digital camera of sorts? Yeah. That was, in case you're sitting up front, that was basically everybody. And how many of you have sort of gone out to some place and gone like this and tried to take multiple pictures around? Yeah, a good half of you. And how many of you tried to actually then process those images into a panorama? So, a pretty good number. It's a very, it's a really a thing that you really want to do, because, these cameras just, for good reasons, have a very limited, not only a dynamic range, but a limited field of view, and especially you go out to a, beautiful place, and it's really this whole expanse that you want to capture. I don't think I'm going to demo it right now, but I can later on. We have a stitching system, which is just really wonderful now for putting these things together. So you might imagine this other mode of this camera, which is that you take your camera out and you just push the button down. You just kind of go like this, and that's it, right? Because you've got this whole buffer going on, and at that same rate of 200 frames per second, it's essentially assembling the thing. You're sort of just, it's like as if you have a paintbrush and you're just kind of painting over the scene. So I was about to go out to give this talk, and we're going to do experiment number 1, which I will give about maybe a 50-50 shot at. One of the guys working for Rick Zalisky, who you probably may or may not know, put together this program that does this in real time. It doesn't use show the camera, but I've got a little webcam here, and we're going to give it a try. He literally just emailed me this program. Let's see. And you're going to tell me the user interface that comes up. Mode, that's always a bad sign. All right, let's just try it. Auto sounds good. Okay, you guys ready? Oh, look at that. It's probably not light enough in here, is it? Yeah, I don't know. It's not doing much. Okay. Let's just stop. How about brush? Let's try that one. Yeah, let's add some light here. Hey, great. Okay, let's try brush anyway. We'll see what happens. Look at that. Amazing. It doesn't matter. We're not going to. So, you can. Not exactly 200 frames. Yeah, you guys are all going to cause trouble. So, imagine this is the Grand Canyon instead of this lecture hall here. Excellent. You get the idea. Very neat. This thing really works. That's great. That's cool. I'm going to have to use this. So you can turn the lights out now so you can actually see what's going on up there. So believe it, I don't know, were you able to see that in real time? Yeah. So, there it is. You've got your, now you really don't need to use your imagination much, but if this were running at, 200 frames per second, which is, only about an order of magnitude off of, a couple order of magnitude. That's not, that's what, next year, right? And, it should be on your little box, not on your laptop and everything. I think, we'll certainly get there. And you just go out and just, paint the scene. So forget about these problems of, limited field of view. Forget about limited dynamic range. Just hand this to anybody, and I think they'll understand this basic idea. So there is one problem with that, of course, which is that if you do that, just like you guys who are, causing trouble, the world doesn't stand still, right? So we do have this little problem that if you were to do that, it's a scene here in China. As you notice, each of these blue, what's going on during this tracking, what was actually happening while I was waving this camera around is it's finding features in the scene, taking all those features, trying to match up those features with the image that was taken a little bit before, lining up those features and computing what's called a homography, which is essentially a matrix that you can multiply your image by to work that image. Essentially, it's as if you could take these two images and paste them all onto a single piece of paper, which is what it's trying to do. And you can choose either a flat piece of paper or a cylindrical piece of paper. And so each of these blue outlined shapes here is kind of what that image is like mapped back onto this sheet of paper. And these were taken not that fast. Somebody was taking their time to do it, and of course people are all walking around. So what I'll show you also is a number of different ways to use a thing called graph cut, which is an optimization method where you need to give it essentially an objective function like any optimization method, and it goes in and tries to compute the best answer. In this case, what we've told the system is try to give me a pixel. So you have a choice. So if you look here, there's at least 3 images which overlap that point, and give me the pixel which is kind of common, the one you see more often than one you don't see there. So if you have choices, one that's kind of common. But the other thing it says is, if you're going to put 2 pixels next to each other, try to make them agree. In other words, don't sort of take one from one image and one from another image unless you really have to for some other reason. And so you balance out these sort of competing forces of trying to make your image consistent and trying to make it sort of be the thing that sort of tells you about the scene the most. In fact, it works quite well. When you run this algorithm on it, it gives you this result. So again, if you sort of look back, this person was only in one image, the bottom half of this person. So as you get the final result, it sort of had to grab this person. In fact, if you sort of, again, go back, all these people that just show up in one remain, and most of the other people go away, although if people were standing still, they were common and standing there, so it tries to take that one. We actually submitted this image in a paper, and we were trying to debate whether to try to get another one. Not a single reviewer caught the problem in here, which means that you probably can't find the one problem in this image. Anybody see this? Yes.
Can it have the same guy twice?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It knows nothing about that. In fact, we have some really nice examples from a marketplace in Italy where somebody just swept all the way around and got the 360 thing. It's really fun. It's incredibly consistent, even though there's all these people moving around. But you could definitely find the same person, multiple times. There's nothing in there. Nobody found the problem here.
Well, that bottom corner, is that person connected to that missing?
Well, this was just never covered by any photo. It's nearby. The problem is right here. There's a headless. There's a person. There's a head with no body. But it was consistent with the background here, which is one of the reasons you couldn't see it, and so it fit quite nicely.
Was there really a person there, or just a head?
Oh, sure. So you can see in this one photograph there's a head and part of a body, which it would have been nice if it had gotten rid of it, but it didn't. So it just left it because it was consistent with that. So another problem that typical photographer has, and I know I do whenever I go out, is do you want to turn the flash on or not? I hate using the flash, not because it messes up the audience out there, they have to squint all the time, get blinded, but because it just changes the way we see the world. I see you guys a certain way, and there's certain lighting in here, which is quite nice right now. If I turn on my flash and took a picture, it just all gets this glare to it. So we worked on how to get the sort of the best of a flash and no flash. In a flash image, this is a sort of a zoomed-in detail of a tapestry. You can sort of see a lot of the thread structure and a lot of things in it, but in the no flash image, it's much noisier because of the low light situation, but you get much more natural coloring. In fact, this is what it looked like with the light filtering in through windows in this castle in Germany. And so the idea is we want to filter out that noise, and so we run what's called a bilateral filter on it. Bilateral filter is one that tries to respect both the sort of the filtering aspect, the smoothing aspect, but if it finds large edges, it tries to preserve those. In other words, the filter has a filter kernel both in the domain and the range. So in the domain, over an area, it will try to sort of blend together things, but the filter also has an aspect of the range, so if two colors are very different, it won't try to blend them together. Only try to blend things together which are fairly similar both in space and in color. But in this case, we're actually going to take the range component of the filter from the flash image. So in other words, we're going to look for edges in here to try to preserve. Nevertheless, it does some blurring. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to run the exact same bilateral filter. In this case, both the domain and range aspects come from the flash image to get this image. And then we're going to divide this image by this image by this image. What that's going to do is it's just going to leave the detail aspect. In other words, only the things that didn't get filtered out remain here. Okay. Since we did the same thing to these two images, I can now multiply this image times this image to give me this one. Does that make sense? So again, while we've got this, this magic camera that I want that's constantly recording the world, there's no reason why I can't, also just pulse out some light during one of those things, so I can, hopefully capture all of those situations, the kinds of lighting things. I can get the count of the photons. I can add some more photons to the scene, see what that does, which will bring out more detail, which gets more things in the foreground. And so we can get a result that looks like that. So this is also a detail. This, I think, maybe in the same castle, but anyway, this is like in this wine cellar. It's a very kind of romantic setting, which kind of has this coloration. But if you zoom in, there's terrible noise in this image. If you turn on your flash, you can get a really nice clean image, but you've completely ruined the atmosphere of what this place looks like, and we can combine those two to get something that looks like that, which is probably what you would have hoped to have gotten. And now getting back to that original example, the family, this is how it was done. And again, this would be another mode for this camera. You can imagine holding your camera up, maybe putting it on a tripod or having a user interface, and either automatically, hopefully, it could actually detect smiles and what a good face is, or a user might sit there and say, just be watching it as it's looking at the scene and say, grandma's smiling, she's smiling. And what it would do is it would not only capture this buffer that would be this kind of rectangular buffer, but rather these little chunks of space-time in different locations on the screen. So on your screen, the piece of space-time would be sort of this jaggedy thing, and then you let your optimization system run. In fact, what GraphCut does in this situation where you said, grandma looked good in the blue one, and she looked good in the yellow one, and he looked good in the red one, again, with the exact same, in this case, the objective function is, if I told you that grandma looked good, make sure that comes from the blue frame, etc. But at the same time, find places where you're going to transition such that I won't see the seams, where things are consistent. In fact, that's the result. And that's exactly how that was done, by simply taking these, indicating by hand in this case, where people were smiling in which of the photos, and then it found automatically these cuts. So again, this should all be able to happen in camera. Just kind of point at a scene, and the vision guys here can figure out for us how to detect the faces and find the smiles and the good ones and put it together. So you shouldn't even have to do this. Although user in the loop I think is a nice thing as well. So another thing we could do is get sort of infinite depth of field. If you've done any microscopy or any kind of close-range photography, I don't know, have you ever tried to take pictures of, you go out and not only do you want to catch all these mountains and the sky, but there's this beautiful, alpine flower in front of you, and you sort of kind of creep up close with your camera, put it into macro mode. You've probably done that in about, 1 out of 100 times is the focus, right? So what you should be able to do is just set it to that mode, sort of macro mode. You go down and take a picture of the flower, and what's happening is over that, that period, the focal plane is just moving in and out. Okay, and so in this case, it's the exact same technology, except what's happening is it's taking each of these, and now the objective function has changed just a tiny bit. It says, what I want is a pixel which has the highest local contrast. Look around and find the one with the local contrast, which is a good clue to it being in focus. But at the same time, try to be consistent. Don't switch from one to the other unless you really, unless you really have to get that extra local contrast. And again, does the exact same thing and cuts together the pieces. So this is actually pieced together from all of those photos automatically. So that's all been well and good for still things. But what happens with motion? I mean, we've all of this has taken this little chunk of time and put it together into a single photograph. So just going back in history, I was very influenced by a lot of this art. In fact, there's a sculpture that I did in the mid-'70s in my original career as an artist, and so I find, it's now 30 years later, and I get to put it in a talk, which I think is pretty fun. So what about motion? I now have a 8-year-old daughter, and a couple of years ago, she was just amazing on the monkey bars. And so here, this entire little video, I can show it to you, but it'd be really nice to be able to just kind of hang it on the wall. Couldn't I do something? How would you sort of capture that? Now, if we were just to take all those frames and somehow blend them together, she would be like a ghost, right? You would see through, because most of the time, she wouldn't be there. If I ran the thing I showed you for China on it, she'd disappear altogether. And I'd just get the background, right? Because it'd be the most common. So all you have to do is put a minus sign into that program and say, show me the thing which is uncommon, right? But be consistent. Okay. And I think this kind of, again, with just a flip of a sign, you get a very different thing that captures this, sort of the essence of what's changing in the scene as opposed to the essence of what's the same in the scene. And if you look at this picture long enough, I think the first impression is you get sort of this nice thing, but it's very inconsistent in some ways. There's, if you counted the number of hands and the number of heads and the number of legs, there's no sort of linear relation. There's no linear relationship. There's if it could find a way to share a leg, from a couple different frames, it would. But it really does a nice job. And actually, there's a little knob, right, which balances. There's one parameter which balances that consistency versus the uncommonness. And if you crank it up just a little bit, what you would end up getting is sort of you'd get like three versions of Lena completely separated from each other with space in between. And as you turn it down and say be more uncommon, then you get more and more and more until they start blending together. So it's a really nice, sort of fun way to kind of capture that.
So the person who was on the slide in the back disappeared? Why did it not get that person instead of your daughter?
Good question. I don't know. Let's see. Let me go back up.
Maybe his daughter absorbed the person.
I don't know. Good question.
It worked out better this way.
Yeah, you'd think she would at least appear somewhere down in here. Cell phones. Turn this off, right? Stand up when the audience does this. Does anybody understand why cell phones talk to speakers? Not mine. I think it's next to it. One of your guys' is. All right. So this is another way to capture motion, which I think is really nice. What you might, in this case, the only thing that was done was to sort of just point it at Lena's nose and say that, track that point. Okay. And now what it did, even though the camera was still, it's as if, there's these really nice photographs you might see where like a car is racing by, and if you were really good with your camera and it had like a quarter-second exposure and you were able to just track it during that quarter of a second, the car would stay sharp, or the person running would stay sharp, and the background gets blurred. Right? But in this case, the camera was still and she was moving across, and we can simulate that simply by tracking her. And this I sort of alluded to before. If you think of this this little chunk of space-time, right? Normally, we have this chunk of space-time. We normally take a knife and we cut it this way, right? And that was what you'd call photograph, because if I sort of take any slice out of that chunk this way, right? That is, an instant in time. All the different pictures from instant time. But what happens if I took a knife and I were to slice it this way? What is that? And then I walked over here, I had to look at it, so I'll turn it around so I can look at it. What that is, it's a vertical scan line, just one scan line over time. And that's exactly what this is. It's actually from a photo finish camera. So there are these cameras set up at photo finishes that are, sort of recording just that, the finish line. And then you can look at this and see, whose nose or whatever it is. It's quite interesting that you get. And that's why you see these horizontal stripes, because nothing was changing there. Wherever nothing was changing, it's just going to be a straight stripe. But, because of luck and timing, you get these weird sort of curved legs. So there's some very interesting things hiding in this chunk. I actually have a program that you can do this in real time to fit on. Yeah?
Do you have any idea if there's any analogies in what you do and how the mind captures more?
So I'd be way out of my league to start talking from the sort of psychology point of view. I know there's at least, I think one psychologist came in the room a little while ago. All right, how many are you from psychology department? Oh, good. One? Yeah. Okay, so if you hold your ears, then I can I can say what I think, but it's not because I know anything. Like I said, initially my hypothesis is that we don't see instants in time clearly. When we look at each other, we rarely consciously notice how you blink, and yet every one of us has had that experience of taking a photograph and looking at it and going, that's terrible, because about, I don't know, it must be a fairly high percentage of the time we always look like this. We have this like totally weird expression and our eyes are blinking, yet we just don't see each other that way. So something's happening. We're filtering out the relevant stuff, the good, sort of the good stuff. So that's as far as we go. I think something's going on there. How that works or what it works, and to me the idea of being able to somehow make devices that get us a little closer to that subjective, that slightly subjective experience. I think it's a fun adventure. So here's a question for you guys. You've all got your digital cameras, and it's a beautiful fall day out. The colors are wonderful outside. So really lucky to be here this time of year. So I'm going to give you guys all take your digital cameras, you go outside, come back in an hour, okay? And how many of you think you could come back with a pretty nice looking photograph? Yeah, you guys are, that's it? Sorry? Well, what did I say, professional? Really, we were on bush camp. I think I could. Well, we're on bush camp. You have an hour, right? In an hour you could I'll give you a few hours. You can drive up to I'll give you time to drive up to the water gap and come back. So you don't think, yeah.
It depends what you're asking.
Well, I guess, so, maybe this is the East Coast, West Coast thing, but when I, ask this out on the West Coast, everybody's, oh yeah, sure, I can. I think I could, so I'm not a professional photographer, but I take a lot of pictures, I think I could do that. So you didn't set up my next question very well, which is this one, which is I give you all a video camera and send you out to the same month. How many of you think you could make sort of a really, kind of professional video? And everybody's like, we got one guy back in the control room to do that. It's a talent, and it's an interesting question of why is one so much harder than the other? And again, I'm going to play psychologist here a little bit. And for a variety of reasons, it's harder. Just there's more bits to deal with. There's more stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. But I'm going to give you one more, which is that photographs cause a certain emotional reaction, a certain reaction, because we have to bring our own imagination to it. It's this whole sort of, I read the book. I don't want to see the movie. Right? It's going to ruin. I already know what this person looks like and what they sound like. I really don't want to go to the movie because it's going to spoil it for me, right? Because reading forces the reader to add their own self into it. And I think photographs to a great extent too also, because when we look at a photograph, we mentally fill in what's just outside the boundary. A really well-cropped photograph is cropped for a variety of reasons, but one reason is you leave out stuff. It's not just what you want to leave in, it's what you want to leave out. You see that photograph I showed you before from Spain, and there's this. We can see what's happened. We see in our mind what had happened, for the quarter of a second before that photograph was taken, for that quarter second after. We bring ourselves. Whereas video is like TV, right? A little bit. You sit there, you just you put your feet up, you drink your beer, and you veg out, and because you can, because it doesn't sort of force you to do much. And so I think that's what makes video hard, because you really to get a reaction from people, it's just much harder because there's not enough left to the imagination. So I want to offer another thing, which I'm going to call cliplets. And I think this is a thing that this magic camera I'm describing will let us do, is to capture these other things, which I'm not even sure. There's no facilities for these things. There's no way to present them. There's no player, a cliplet player. There's no cliplet capture thing. So for example, how about this thing? So, while I was busy, did it move? Yeah, okay. I was busy with the speaker. So this was this little piece. It's only about, the whole thing, the motion is only about a quarter of a second in time, and yet it conveys the whole sort of event. I put it in a player over a period of more time than it was actually moving, so you get the sound. Sound maybe takes a little bit more, but if you just play that as a video, it's not as interesting. There's really just this sort of moment, this little chunk of space-time, not an instant, which is really the interesting thing. Or this one.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. A visit. Wait, what am I doing? Okay, we're gonna start. A visit from St. Nicholas, and we're not gonna read by that. We're gonna go. No.
So, there's something in between a photograph and a video, which I think is an interesting thing. And it took me a really long time to make that. I had to bring a piece of video into video editing thing. I need to find the piece. I eased in and eased out, because you don't want to just start to suddenly sort of ramp up the frame rate, then have it play, then ramp down the frame rate. that kind of thing should be just sort of automatic, and we should just be able to, just capture these things. Or another thing is a piece called a video texture. This is an actual little chunk of video, and that little red line on the bottom is stochastically jumping back places where it's consistent. Okay, so if you don't notice it, and yet it'll play forever without ever, it'll repeat because it's only a very small finite number of frames, but it's, it just keeps going. And you can sort of imagine this being the type of thing that you would have in the Harry Potter books, right? You open your book and it's got these little, they're not, I don't think any of us believe that you're going to start interacting with these characters, well, maybe in the far future, but, at least there's sort of an in-between time, and these photos can be kind of alive, and yet. So I'd really like to see, some work done. We haven't done much on just kind of dealing with these things. We also did some work recently in trying to assemble pieces of video, which is difficult. You can do this with photos. So, for example, there's here's a skateboarder, and I'm not going to play this video because it will turn black. And if I change my monitor here to there, I won't get it back. But again, imagine we have this chunk of space-time, and instead of taking this slice or this slice, I'm going to take a slice that goes like this. In fact, it's going to be the slice that follows the skateboard. Okay? And we have a human do that, or you can do that automatically. And then it's very easy to see sort of what is skateboarder and what's not skateboarder, especially when it's kind of all splayed out in this fashion. And given that, we can then cut it out from one video and put it into another. And so there's actually 3 separate videos. One is the zoo with the elephant, and you simply do the same thing and cut the video out. Another thing that's quite interesting to see is if you look at the skateboarder up here, it's just a little teeny jump, right? He's just taking this little hop. And yet down here, he's getting all the way up on this elephant. So the nice thing is once you're able to take these things out of one context, these become spatio-temporal objects. They're like 3D objects, and we in computer graphics know all about how to manipulate blown up 3D objects so we can get them to do whatever we want, jump higher, jump more energy. The elephant, does a little thing to get out of the way as well. So another thing you might want to do is even better, right, than this idea of going to the Grand Canyon and doing these panoramas. Well, the Grand Canyon's fine. It would work fine in panorama, but in Seattle, there's all these lakes and everything, and like I said, the world doesn't really stand still. And so what you might do is go to this scene out on Lake Union. You take your video camera, this is running in faster than real time, and just kind of sweep it around to kind of capture that scene, and we can surely put together this panorama. So what we've done is said we don't really just want this static panorama. What we really want is a video panorama, right? We'd want one which is as wide as this entire sweep, but which actually plays like a video. But of course I have this problem that I didn't see all of space at any particular time, or any chunk of time. In fact, this sort of gray region is what I got. If you look at one scan line here, it kind of swept across through time. And so again, we can use our optimization system to find chunks of space-time which can be assembled such that when you repeat them, first of all, it's consistent across space, but it's also consistent across time, including from the first frame to the last. In fact, we'll run our optimization to the point where it keeps kind of finding these chunks and assembling them into this sort of Tetris-like jigsaw puzzle that when they come down will work. And so let me try this one, actually. I should have loaded this up before. So again, what's going to happen here is we're going to take this video, right, this kind of sort of weird piece of space-time, right, which is no longer sort of a chunk. It's kind of this thing here, and then pull pixels, chunks of space-time back to assemble a single thing. And so the nice thing here is we've got a video that we can pan and zoom on. You'll notice that the flag is waving because it's got this kind of structure. You can see this, right? We can head over here, look at the water rippling. It's got this little problem, and this bird flies by, right? Because it's into the frame and out of the frame. There's no way to make a sort of consistent thing. And we get the little flags rippling here. What's kind of fun here is we look back at I-5 back here. magically there's this bus barn right behind this mast here, so all the cars are turning into it. So what it's doing is trying to find something which captures the essence of the motion everywhere it can, but at the same time trying to make it consistent so you don't see the boundaries where these little chunks of space-time are taken. And the nice thing also here is that this video is like 3,000 pixels wide, so we've got this huge resolution of video. We're not limited to just the resolution of the camera at any particular point. So there's another area I haven't worked in at all, and if somebody's interested in this, I've been trying to find somebody to work more on this, is I've always been intrigued by photorealism. When I was, studying to be an artist, there were these guys who could go out and paint these pictures which are just stunningly real, and it just seemed so hard. But in fact, Richard Estes is a very famous person in this area. This is a painting, by the way, like literally an oil painting. If you start studying the perspective in these images, you'll find that there's no single vanishing point. Okay, and in fact, in an interview with him, he said, your eyes scan around, and they do. We purposely move around. We're taking the scene. Just like as we're not only looking at an instant in time, we're also not just looking at a single position in time. I sort of sense this room because I've been moving and going back and forth. And as he says, to paint a picture sort of as it appears, even when you're doing a photorealistic painting, is not to make it be like a photograph, because that's not real. What's real is kind of the sort of the reality of perception. Okay, painting's trickery, right? Photographs don't do that because camera doesn't have ideas, and maybe we can put some of these ideas back in, or at least give you some ability to do that. So I thought I can do that, and I went out and took some photographs in front of our buildings, and this is just a standard kind of a stitched panorama, but what I really want is something more like this, which is more like the perception. So here you can see the three photographs. They're not stitched well because there's no actual way to do that. There's no good, easy way. But any painter could have taken these three and, made this consistent, right? Because this, wouldn't have this doubled piece here. They would just go, oh yeah, okay, I'll take this piece and then I'm going to make this go back over like this and whatever. So it'd be really nice to not only do that, but be able to not only just turn my camera this way, but be able to sweep my camera like this and have it do something consistent. We're actually working on that right now. We've got some really fun results happening in this space as well. And the other thing photorealists do is they're incredible at making materials look even more like they really do. Okay? So, they'll look at chrome, you see a lot of shiny stuff in these paintings, or glass, and they get the essence of that material, and sort of avoid all things. So I thought, well, maybe I could do that using Photoshop or something like that. So this is a photograph that I took a few years in San Francisco of my niece and daughter, and I went and just retouched it, essentially, using whatever tools I could, completely by hand, trying to make it more, quote, photorealistic. Increasing the contrast, trying to get the materials, things that reflect, get rid of extraneous things that are, bothering, like we didn't really need some of the, detail in here, so get rid of that. Just leave the essence. Wouldn't it be nice if somehow automatically, or you have tools or things that can do that? Here's another example of a store window where I was able to focus and take, and this is actually created from multiple images, where I really want to sort of capture that ambiguity of what's inside and what's outside and what's being reflected and what's coming through. But again, this took me an hour of sitting there and locally enhancing things and bringing things in. So what I think is we could, just like we have these paint brushes in image retouching systems, wouldn't it be neat if you could have a brush which you don't click blur or sharpen, but you click leather, right? And it's already a photograph of leather, but as you run the brush over the leather, it makes it more like leather. Or you say, this is glass, or maybe it detects it's glass, and it makes it more like glass, right? It sort of knows what idealized glass. And I think there's some ways to do some of these things that would be really fun to do. So anyway, I hope I've conveyed, at least the meaning of this word moment, right? It's clearly more than an instant. And I'm a big fan of what I would call guided optimization systems. We've done this in animation. We've done this in a lot of areas of really teaming up both the photographer and the machine, because we want to keep the human in the loop. You'd like some point-and-click capabilities, but you should be able to say a little bit more about what you want. And cameras will be computers. There probably already are computers at some extent, and so the idea of that I have to do this demo with a laptop, I think, is easy to extend. Yeah.
Should one be worried that this would create an even better tool for lying to this camera?
So I do not know this person. So that's the question. So let me go to my next slide. Okay. So why not moment, right? And it does in perfect timing setup. These two photographs were taken in Iraq by a photojournalist, and this photograph showed up in the Los Angeles Times. And the photographer was fired for doing this. Okay, so your answer is, of course, it lets you lie. Now, I was sort of claiming that this family photo that was fixed up is more real than real. It's going to be an interesting ethical problem, or what is it, that one needs to do when you present a photograph in a newspaper. Clearly, one could claim, well, if you sort of look at these, they're taken very shortly, right near each other. What's wrong with this? But clearly, there's something wrong. It's conveying something that never actually took place in some sense. Sorry?
How did he get caught?
He got caught because this guy, if you look in this one, there's a guy in here who's in there twice. I can't remember. This guy's back and this guy there's somebody who's in here twice. Anyway, somebody was staring at it, and either maybe it was the guy in Iraq saw it, I don't know. But somebody caught it and kind of wrote in, and he was, yeah.
Did the photographer give a reason for why he had done that?
Well, I just thought this was a much better photograph, and I agree. I think this is a much better photograph.
Yeah, that was the question was, he was capturing the moment better.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the explanation. Now, you allowed to do that? I don't know. Should you have been allowed to do that, Dimitri?
I think a deeper question is not if you are lying alone. The deeper question is, are you still doing art by letting a computer do this? I mean, what's the definition of a nice now moment? Or a moment? How do you convey a moment?
Yeah, I don't know the definition. There's a little bit of it when you see it. I've done a number of these sort of family picks up kind of things, and it's really a nice thing to be able to do that. It's also fun to play with. You can not only pick where everybody's smiling, but you can pick where everybody's looks terrible too.
Yeah, but I think open research version. In this context, what's the right way to put it together?
Yeah, and there's a whole, there's new workshops now on computational aesthetics, which I think are very neat, letting the sort of team up with human and computers to sort of make some aesthetic decisions for you or to help you, guide things. There's another one. I don't know if you saw this Newsweek. Martha Stewart got out of jail, whenever that was, right? But this Newsweek appeared on the stands about a week before she got out of jail, and so she hadn't been available for a photo shoot. If you look inside the cover, it says photo illustration, keyword illustration, headshot by. Okay, so this was assembled. This is not her body or her hands. I had grabbed her head and put it in there. They got a lot of heat for this and said, well, if you look inside, the caption says it's not a photograph. But of course, it's right on the cover. I mean, yeah.
You blended flash and not flash before, but have you thought of blending a series of flashes to give depth to the photos, binocular?
So I haven't done myself in terms of stereo presentations. I haven't done much in that area. If that's kind of what you mean, or
Sort of, yeah.
we are doing a lot of work trying to find different methods to sort of extract foreground from background, like the elephants and things like that. You can definitely use light to do that because light from the camera drops off with a square of distance. Yeah.
There's some cases where you have a moving image or a static image, and either one of them, you watch the moving image and things happen, you watch the static image and it's just there. And people talk about change blindness and things like that. With enough action, the motion, you don't see certain things you might care about. So let's say you were surveilling an airport or something and wanted to catch objects being left various places. It seems to me that maybe your techniques for that are overkill.
Yeah, I think you could, again, this optimization framework is a wonderful hammer for just about anything. And if you can express it in such a way that it can, and then get the algorithm to be able to evaluate the objective, it can do that. So, for example, if you wanted to look for, have it show you a synopsis of what's been going on. So we have actually a project in that arena too, where you put a surveillance camera on your front door. You want to sort of look out at your street, see what's been going on that day. You come home and rather than having to watch an 8-hour video, what it will do is it presents you in a period of 1 minute kind of everything that went on. Right? So it basically, anytime things don't change, it just kind of cuts it out. And it's kind of neat. It compresses the whole day down to a minute and without missing anything that changed. I think it's kind of what you're talking about. It's very similar. Yeah.
Talking about design with camera, I don't know if you thought about it, but one way perhaps of preventing build a camera and require journalists to use it is to produce a digital hash of the frame,
Mm-hmm.
and then it always test.
Yeah, we had a number of meetings on with professional photographers who are very concerned about provenance, like where does this come from, and how can you track sort of the truth and sort of dead information so you can't get rid of it. And there's all kinds of, it's related to the digital watermarking work. I don't know if you've seen any of that. It's a very difficult problem to make foolproof. There's been also work. I don't know. I think every one of my colleagues has had a phone call from the FBI wanting to a child pornographer won a court case where they said this is just a digital photograph, retouch photograph of an adult, and that's an even harder problem. You maybe can say that this has been retouched, but it's almost impossible to say something has not been. So it's a very, it's a real problem in various different contexts. There's lots of people who are working on that, sort of cryptography aspects of things, which, again, outside my area. So anyway, wanted to hopefully give you a sense of things I've been thinking about, stuff I've been having fun with, all kinds of ways to do this, and I think you'll have that kind of camera in your hands pretty soon. With that, I should probably quit and let you go. Don't forget to vote tomorrow. I hear there's some election going on here as well about where I live. So, thank you.
So we have time for questions. People have, I guess you got a bit of a head start on the questions. So yeah, what?
Yeah.
Why 200 first?
Why 200?
Yeah.
50 milliseconds is a kind of a perceptual number that comes up in the literature a lot. Honestly, I just picked it kind of out of the hat when I was making up the slide, but it does have some basis. So 50 milliseconds is kind of our I don't know, is there psychologists in the room? So is that about right? That's about, yeah, there's kind of a
How long a saccade takes?
Yeah, it's about a saccade. It's about in feedback loops. If you don't, there's the heads-up display. If they run at 50 milliseconds, have 50 milliseconds delay, we deal with it just fine. Somewhere around 100 milliseconds, we start getting sick. So there's something in there that's related to human perception, but sort of arbitrary.
So I have a couple. So I guess I want just more of a comment. So I guess so the next thing is TiVo with one of these things so that you can watch the whole, half-hour TV program.
The whole football game is
Yep.
That would be a good.
That project, there's a project underway like that too. Especially in baseball is I think, better than the rest. You certainly can watch a baseball game in about 5 minutes.
Which is particularly valuable for cricket, but so the other question was, in a sense, the really amazing results, rely on computer vision techniques
and B, optimization techniques, both of which are somewhat finicky beasts. And so I was just curious about your sense of, how many misses do you have before you get a hit?
Yeah, so this is right. So it's clearly kind of a marriage of vision and graphics. It's an area I've been working for about 10 years, kind of right in between. And I'm kind of a real fan. Optimization methods was what I did, my thesis on actually in animation. But it's always been a sort of user-guided optimization. So I think user-in-the-loop optimization is a very powerful paradigm that hasn't been exploited nearly as much as it should be. As you say, vision algorithms are just, fail as much as they succeed, but yet when they succeed, they do a lot of things. And if you can get them up to, a lot of them are up to like 80% for certain kinds of tasks. That last 20%, often as it turns out, is easy for humans, right? And so having it do a lot of work for you, but letting you do things. So for example, in the family fix-up, it's easy for it to find consistency, so that's a measure you can do. Say easy, but to say, is this like a nice smile? That's a much more difficult task to ask the computers to do. And, maybe this year or next year we'll know exactly how to do that. And those people here are working on really trying to be sensitive to what humans are doing. But again, not only because the vision algorithm might fail, but because a human might have some artistic input. So this teamwork, I think, is a really powerful piece.
One thing I was thinking, you've got the family picture, you're doing this, you're doing this puzzling of it.
Right.
You take these pieces. Now you've got, let's say you have a whole bunch of frames. So one thing you're doing is picking out candidate frames. Now, let's say the faces aren't changing that fast, so you have lots of candidate frames. Would there be something in the algorithm that's actually picking frames that are good for restitching together?
Well, it's not done at the frame level. Well, at least in what we're doing, there's only two components to the optimization in our case. One is changes depending on the application. In our case, in the family photo, it was saying if somebody indicated, this face from this frame, use it. So that was an absolute thing. And then the only other thing was pixel pair differences. So it would try to make sure the two pixels next to each other were consistent, and that had two parts too. Either they agree with each other, or there was a sharp edge there, which is a convenient place to switch from one to the other because you won't notice it as much. So there's no sort of global, sort of holistic thing. The whole global thing kind of arises from these little local decisions.
Okay. I mean, part of what I was thinking is that you might want to be pick, here are zones of interest, and let's find some interesting ways in which these can fit together and then come up with candidate things to choose from. Or, it almost sounds like you're doing it. You just find these frames, you say this is of interest, this is of interest, this is of interest, and then it goes and makes some kind of decision. But you could also try to come up with the candidates that way.
Sure. Again, if our algorithm was to see, 20 pictures of you, and it'd probably say, well, these 10, these 5 you were blinking, these 5 you were looking away, here's 10 where you're looking, well, these 7 you're maybe smiling, and then let the human pick. So, again, if you have lots of candidates, you could imagine this sort of teamwork where the computer would narrow it down to a few good choices and then let you do the last one. Or you could just put it on automatic and have it pick it out.
Okay, maybe one last question then.
You described the kind of input device you'd like to see for capturing one. Have you thought about what an ideal or attainable output device would be, especially for like the Cliplets you've looked at?
Well, I think I haven't thought about it much, no. The one thing I would really like, I don't know if any of you have seen this high dynamic range monitor that this company in BC is doing, but just stunning. It's I really want one. Right now they're doing it for the high-end advertising. They're charging like $25,000 a piece for monitors this big, which is even hard for me to justify. But they're just stunning. So that's one thing I would definitely want. Otherwise, I don't know. Output devices are pretty nice. But we all want the holodeck. I mean, when I got into computer graphics, every talk I gave started, first slide was the holodeck. I think that's kind of the ultimate goal of computer graphics, vision, AI.
Okay, with that, thank you very much.